3 panelists doing 15-minute presentations, and then we'll have an interactive Q&A session at the end. So we'll start off with Nigel Roberts. As I said, I won't introduce the speakers, same as before. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. I normally stand up here and make a massive pitch for Cardiff and suggest that you should all move there. It's slightly different today. I must say I really enjoyed Richard's the presentation that just went, because I think that's something that's very, very relevant to all regional cities in terms of, we talk about smart cities, and actually seeing somebody that's looking to bring that together and integrate it, I think is very important. So I chair the Cardiff Business Council. What that is, in England you have local enterprise partnerships, LEPs. This is the Welsh equivalent. It's half funded by Cardiff Council and the private sector, along with Welsh Government having a bit of a role. So we fulfill the role of a LEP. Now, I'm sure most of you have been to Cardiff. Cardiff recently has grown through the success of becoming an event city. You'll probably be aware that we're hosting the first Ashes Test match this coming July, which obviously everyone in London will be flocking to. We've won the World IAAF Half Marathon, which will be staged next Easter. Those sort of events really put the spotlight on your city and help certainly promote the city going forward. So just to give you an idea, put Cardiff in context, 352,000 people live actually within the city, but what we're now moving forward with is a Cardiff capital region. We have 10 local authorities at the moment that cover that capital region. Wales is the most over-governed little country in the world, with 23 separate unitary authorities looking after a population of 3 million. We have a politician each in Wales. It's really quite... So we're looking at local government reorganisation at the same time, but it's very important that we now join up as a city region. Cardiff actually is the UK's fastest growing city, and that's got a lot to do with the large student population. We've got 3 major universities within the city. And actually the final point on the slide there, we're rated #1 in the UK for quality of life. And I think that is something that we are very proud of. My own experience, I live half a mile from my nearest neighbour, and I can be behind my desk in 5 minutes. Now that is fantastic. That is quality of life. In saying that, I enjoy coming up to London for my injection of ambition every now and then. So we're doing well. We've attracted a number of foreign direct investment recently, which is something that we haven't really done since the demise of the WDA. So we now attract 5% of the UK foreign direct investment, and that is bucking the UK trend. As I said, talented city, a lot of graduates coming through, and over 110,000 students at any one time. So we're well served with universities, and that's where the talent comes from, and that's why businesses stay within the locality. Interestingly, we're building a new business park on the outskirts of Cardiff, some 2 million square feet, which is going to be a European-style technology hub based around compound semiconductors, where we're building a new train station, and the whole business park, when we talk about smart cities, the whole business park will be predicated on that. We'll be creating our own energy, dealing with our own waste, and actually a number of the companies that are actually going to be the tenants are actually involved in that business. So the whole business park will be something that they will be able to sell, and we're very, very excited about that. A lot of people don't realise, within the Cardiff area, we have companies like IQE, SPTS, International Rectifiers, Pure Wafer. Take SPTS, a name of initials. They make 40% of the components that go into iPhones, actually invented and manufactured in South Wales. When you turn your iPhone around that way and the screen flips, that technology is invented and actually built in 1 mile outside of Cardiff. We are the closest capital to London, and we promote that a lot in terms of our marketing. We're actually only an hour and a quarter's drive to London. When I get my license back, I'll prove it to you. But in all seriousness, once we get the electrification of the main line, we are literally going to be an hour and a half from London. So that is, commuter belt. So that quality of life I talked about, it's within grasp of all of you. So the airport, we're building up the airport. Welsh government own the airport. We're getting more routes. It's actually slowly starting to become less of an embarrassment for us. We're also looking at a metro within that Cardiff capital region. That will become the skeleton for the capital region, which will join up those 10 local authorities that we talked about. Cardiff and South Wales has had issues around deprivation, and there are, within 30 miles of Cardiff, there are generation after generation that have not worked. And that is something that we seriously have to tackle. And actually the metro will help join up those communities. Talked about the UK quality of life. For Cardiff itself, it's a fantastically vibrant city. It's a very young city because of the student population. Cities have little control over the money and how they spend it. That is something that we're now looking and focusing on, especially around the city deal that we're currently negotiating with central government. It does take vision and leadership, which is absolutely essential. I think that when we were talking about smart cities earlier on, in order for that to happen, in order to work with the public sector, we all know the public sector like their processes. We know that the private sector like outcomes. And that is always going to be a challenge when you're working with local government. The likes of Cardiff Business Council, the likes of the LEPs that you have in England, they very much are the mechanism to try and speed that whole process up. But it does take strong leadership working in partnership. We talked about £6 billion worth of investment in the city region over the next 5 to 10 years. The image there is the new BBC Welsh headquarters in the centre of Cardiff, right outside the train station. That is a Foster designed building. It's coming out of the ground in about 3 months' time. And that anchor tenant has galvanised a number of speculative office buildings around there, amounting to over 500,000 square feet of offices just in that one sector. So £6 billion worth of investment. Big chunk of that is electrification of the main line from London to Swansea. We're also, at last, actually bypassing the Bringlass tunnels. If any of you have been to Cardiff, that's the bit where you slow down or stop. So that's a very important bit of infrastructure. And the rest of it is all private sector funding, along with the metro, which is a big chunk of that $6 billion that we're spending. The International Sports Village, where we're building a snow dome. We've already built the 2-pad ice pad, Olympic-sized swimming pool. The beauty of that Cardiff has, it's got the biggest impounded lake in the whole of Europe. Was the biggest infrastructure project at its time when we built the barrage. And now at last, we're actually capitalising on what that waterfront offers us. We're actually even looking at seaplanes now landing on the bay and actually connecting with London Docklands and with various locations around Wales. So again, innovative thinking. We're also looking at a cable car rapid transport solution rather than just trams within the Cardiff Bay area. You can literally hook your bike on one of these cable cars. So you cycle down to the cable car station, hook your bike, get to where you want to go, get off your bike and carry on your journey. I've touched on the 450 million. This is the exploded view of the BBC headquarters. In the foreground is the main Cardiff train station. So, as I suggested, it takes vision, but it takes vision from the private sector and the public sector combined. Obviously, that's one of our landmark buildings, the Millennium Stadium, where ruined our season in the rugby. 40 minutes of madness there lost us the Grand Slam this year, but we won't go into that. With the World Cup looming large, I think we've got 8 of the matches in the World Cup in our stadium, and that's a big event come the autumn that we're all going to be looking forward to. If you want tickets, come and see me after. Cardiff, because we've got stuff to sell, we've upped the ante with international trade fairs like MIPIM, which has been a great success for us. We invested in a massive model, bigger than the London model. And it certainly stole the show. And and we've got a lot of things on there that we're never going to build, but they actually certainly create an interest. We have an enterprise zone where there are certain advantages around rates and training grants and stuff. You know, like a lot of areas of the UK, you have to try and give people a persuasive reason to come and talk to you. City deal. Now, this is something that I find very interesting and very relevant to us. The City deal, we only thought was available in England until Glasgow got £1 billion through their City deal. Mind you, Scotland got an awful lot in a short space of time, and are continuing to get an awful lot. Put it on record that the Welsh like the English a lot more than the Scots. I think that's important to... and we're very happy to do business with you. But once Glasgow got a City deal, we went after it, obviously, at great haste. We're looking at a City deal similar size to Glasgow. That could be £1 billion for the local economy, actually, that would then be invested in no-brainer projects with guaranteed returns. But more importantly, if you look at the Cardiff capital region, central government, your taxes, £4 billion goes into the Cardiff capital region on benefits. You know, unemployment benefit, housing benefit, disability benefit, £4 billion. That doesn't even include the provisions that are made then by local authorities. So that is a big chunk of cash. So the idea with the City deal is not only will you help increase the tax take by employing people, by creating companies that then pay corporation tax and PAYE and VAT and everything else, but hopefully you will actually reduce the dependency. So that £500 million from Treasury, hopefully they'll be looking to double their money with improved tax take, but also removing the dependency issue as well. And for the first time in 100 years, the hope is with business taking the lead, rather than local authorities and local government taking the lead, we might be able to solve the problem of deprivation that we've got in certain parts of the valleys once and for all. So that's really it from me. I was asked to speed along, so I think I've managed to do that. And as I say, hour and a quarter from London, you're more than welcome. If you want to relocate your businesses to Cardiff, come and talk to me after. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. So our next speaker is Rob Shaw from LDA Design. So we'll just make sure we can get the presentation up.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Nigel. I've lived in Cardiff. I agree, it's a wonderful place. And I noticed you didn't spend much time saying how long it took to get anywhere else in Wales.
Why would you want to go anywhere else?
Exactly. So I think what we've. I'm Rob Shaw. I'm Director of Sustainability and Climate Change at LDA Design. I lead our energy planning work. I also lead our futures programme as well, some of which I will refer to today. But I think what's really clear from everything that we've heard today, unfortunately I wasn't here yesterday, is that cities are at the heart of a process of immense change. That's driven by factors that will require a fundamental restructuring of our cities, the land uses within those cities, the places within those cities, and some of the infrastructure that we're using as well. And my presentation is really a story about the need for, and importantly, the opportunity to respond to those challenges and to change in response to things like market conditions, a number of big, often global, environmental, economic, social, technological drivers of change. And really I'm going to draw on a number of examples that we've worked on over the years, and also some of the research that myself and the Futures team have been looking at. You'll notice that I skip over a few slides, or I don't talk to some of those slides, and the reason for that is I was asked to speed up. So don't be alarmed if slides seem somewhat random. like that one. So LDA Design, we're a specialist sustainability environment design consultancy where we have planners, urban designers, landscape architects, master planners, and general all-round consultants. And essentially, my role is to help clients to respond to these big drivers of change and to help them to benefit from it, and importantly, to help them drive innovation in the marketplace. And I think what is really clear from everything that we've heard today is that infrastructure is either a capacity, and therefore we need to invest in replacement, or importantly, it's increasingly unfit for purpose in a world that is rapidly changing. And it's changing in a number of ways. We've heard quite a bit about climate change today. But for me, perhaps the thing that excites me the most is this transition to a decentralized energy system. We're transferring away from the system that all of us have grown up with, which is a very small number of very large centralized power generators sending electricity down cables to millions of consumers, to one where we have literally millions of generators, and that sounds maybe a bit over the top, but actually we've got 600,000 solar roofs and rising rapidly already. So it is literally millions of small, medium, large-scale generators sending electricity back the other way as well as taking it in. So that whole system, as this diagram starts to illustrate, is fabulously more complex than anything we've had before. But the exciting thing, I think, for cities and for development is what that enables us to do, because these technologies, and some more than others, solar being a perfect example, is incredibly scalable. You or I can have a solar panel or two on our roofs, right up to the largest 40, 50 megawatt solar farms that I've worked on. But that could be developed and installed by communities, by individuals, by businesses, as well as by local authorities and the traditional developers. And that allows us to think differently about development. It requires us to think differently about developers, about energy, because it brings it closer to all of us. Every single day of our lives, we are going to be confronted over the coming decade with energy, whether it's on our roofs, the end of our street, on the hillsides. And that changes on our relationship with energy and allows us, in thinking about cities, to think differently about the way we plan and locate development. I'd love to talk a lot more about that because it's a subject that I think is fascinating. But I've got to move on. Another big driver of change is technology, and I think the job that Richard did on describing how we can use big data to help us plan cities is all I need to say on it. I think that was a really excellent introduction to that. The only other driver I really want to talk about is finance, and I'll come back to finance as we go through the session. But you might notice I've shamelessly stolen this slide from Abundance, but it really does illustrate the way things are changing. Between 2013 and 2014, the rise in crowdsourced funding. So this is you and I investing in providing debt finance, equity finance, investing in projects like this one, which is Bellectric's big 60 million funded project. The local community here actually provided the debt finance to build this thing. But don't be misled by the numbers on the left-hand side there. That's £1.6 billion last year invested in via people like us. And that is starting to change the way we think about funding infrastructure and development, not just this kind of infrastructure, but equally we could apply that to property, housing, and all sorts of infrastructure. And that, again, changes our relationship with infrastructure. It gives us a stake in it. And that's important because the scale of regeneration and the infrastructure renewal challenge that we have, and we've seen plenty of examples of that today, outweighs the ability and the appetite of the public sector to invest. Now, there are notable exceptions to that. This is the Olympic Park. We've heard about the Thames Tideway Tunnel. There's HS2, Crossrail we've heard about. All of that, a lot of that money coming from the public sector. But the investment needs are vast. Just take energy alone. The government expects by 2020 to need to invest £120 billion worth of investment in renewal of our energy system. And there is no way that when you think about that together with climate infrastructure, renewal infrastructure and so on, no way that could be dealt with by central government alone. So my message is simple. That is, there is a huge amount to do, and the finance needs to work hard from multiple sources, a range of different partners, in order to make us to achieve that. And therefore, in cities, we need to think differently. I want to pick on two examples. The first of these is a need for a different approach to regeneration. Now, this is Bristol, and George was talking about Bristol. Temple Meads is over here. This is some of the area that he was talking about for renewal. And the City Council and the community here have been wanting to regenerate Redcliffe Way, which is this road here, for about the last 30 years. It's an oversized, unsightly road, particularly because what you've got here is a beautiful Grade 1 listed church, and it really doesn't help the setting. So for 30 years we've been trying to make that happen. And there was a plan produced by a very eminent designer, which has completely failed to materialise, on the basis that plan was to move this road, completely take it out. Perfectly good idea, but the world has changed and it became just an unviable proposition. No developer was interested in taking on the enormous upfront infrastructure investment needed to make that happen. Now, the viability assessments would say, yes, over time that will pay back, but no investor, no developer was willing to come in, take that hit to start with, and then get a return through the sale of a building and sale of housing over a number of years. So it stalled. So we came in and looked at this and worked with the community and with the council and turned that problem on its head. So what we did was, rather than get rid of the road, we just downgraded that road. We turned it into something that was more of a street rather than a huge piece of transport infrastructure. That avoided the need for that upfront cost, and also allowed us to use spaces that would otherwise have been temporarily used for moving the road. So looking back here, a lot of the spaces are car parks, actually owned by the City Council, which rather than in later phases, these could be brought forward to the early phases, built for housing, which starts to bring in a positive cash flow. Just like any business, we need to make these things work through cash flow. So that, going back to the point that Richard was making about how do we build quality into all of this. Actually, if we've got a positive cash flow and we manage it, we can actually bring value into the scheme, which in itself raises the overall value of that scheme. This is one of those slides that I won't actually talk about. But the second thing we need to look at is development. The traditional development model, house building model particularly, is not delivering outcomes that work for society or the environment. And this project here is Wichelstow. It's a strategically important, very visible site on the south side of Swindon. So if you're driving along the M4, heading west, look to your right, you can start to see it emerging out of the ground there. Our role was to turn this site that in 2009 was stalled with a financially unviable master plan, £40 million worth of debt after the first phase in the eastern end was constructed, and as a result, a failed attempt to attract a development partner. Our role was to turn that into a commercially viable and sustainable exemplar, which draws on some of those big drivers of change around energy, climate change, and so on. And the key to this was the creation of an integrated plan. So this is the eastern bit. This bit's been built. This was the bit that had stalled essentially because at this point there was a big trigger for a massive infrastructure investment that had been agreed before 2007 in the good times. The crash had come, and that had just made the whole scheme unviable. So the key to it was this integrated plan. It was looking at optimizing the efficiency of the infrastructure we put in there. So simple things like putting buildings on both sides of a piece of road infrastructure, or a meticulous approach to the phasing and the cash flow, as we did in Bristol. And then really understanding what was needed, properly needed, to actually make this scheme happen and work. So, for example, it came down to different mixes of uses, challenging some of the standard housing mix. So building houses here that people within Swindon actually needed, rather than perpetuating some of the preconceptions that the market has built up. And I think importantly, and for me, a lesson that's applicable universally, is in this case, changing the procurement process, aiming to try and create a relationship with a developer which would be long-term, rather than the build, sell, move on approach of many of our developments. Build a relationship whereby we can maximize value over a long period of time. And coming back to energy, that works very well with that. If we've got an energy system here where renewable energy across the site is managed, that gives us an ongoing income over a period of years. And there's other things that we can apply, similar kind of thinking, broadband and so on. So I will, while these two examples are different, and there are many and varied challenges within them, there are a number of common themes that I'll finish with. I think the point that Richard made about integration is absolutely right. What we need to be doing in development is embracing these big drivers of change, understanding how they affect our approach to cities, our approach to development, our approach to infrastructure, and then think creatively about solving the challenges that they pose, whether that's energy, climate, finance, and so on. And then to marshal what we might term scarce resources from different sectors and from different players. So what this diagram is trying to show is that if we look at the different players within a city or within a community or within a development, there are different sources of finance, different sources of assets that we can utilize. So the public sector might have land. Often they have access to cheap debt financing through the Public Works Loan Board. They can pool money. They can pool it from different sources, new homes bonus, city deal perhaps, and plan strategically. Investors might be able to provide equity finance. Communities, through crowdfunding, might be able to provide debt and equity finance, as well as design and community input. And then developers providing the expertise and finance as well. And I think we need to think about new business models that are longer term, that we need local authorities and communities to act like enlightened developers, to embrace long-term thinking, resilience, and sustainability. So my final point is that bringing together a broad range of parties and a broad range of funding streams, underpinned by an understanding of some of these big drivers of change, with a strong vision, will enable us to deliver quality outcomes and resilience in our cities. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Our final speaker, Stephen Fawkes. Please take the stage and we'll sort out the presentation, and then we'll follow on with panel questions.
Everybody, I'm going to talk about accelerating the flow of investment into energy efficiency. And I actually think that's one of the major problems that we face. We're sort of walking blindfolded into an energy security crisis at the moment, both in the UK and in Europe. And we also have environmental issues and fuel poverty crisis and so on. And actually increasing the investment in energy efficiency goes a long way to mitigating all of those problems. And I'm going to highlight two particular projects and programs that are about accelerating investment into energy efficiency. But first of all, I always like to start out with a kind of status report on energy efficiency financing. I think now, over the last 3 to 4 years, people have actually realized the scale of the potential market for energy efficiency, the huge savings that we know we can make on energy use. And it doesn't matter whether you look at buildings, transport, industry, any particular device, there's a huge potential. For those of us who've been working in energy efficiency a long time, it's kind of surprising how long it's taken for everybody else to catch up with this realization, but we have now realized that potential, and that's positive. The other thing that's positive is that in the last few years, the co-benefits or the non-energy benefits of energy efficiency have been recognized. So these are things like productivity, health. We heard earlier a lot about health and the impact of energy and fuel poverty on health and linking those budgets. These kind of things are increasingly recognized. And also, the other really important positive thing is that there's been a growing interest in energy efficiency from institutional investors. 5 to 7 years ago, there was no interest whatsoever, and you could talk to them about renewables and generation, but if you talked about energy efficiency, you had no reaction. But there's a growing number of institutional investors who are specifically interested in putting their money at work in energy efficiency. However, the sort of negative is there's a lot of frustration about the slow development of this whole energy efficiency financing market. And I should say it's not just the UK and Europe. There's frustration in the US, Asia. Everywhere I go, there's the same kind of frustration. And one of the bankers I know who is involved in trying to finance energy efficiency projects said the trouble with the energy efficiency business is the ratio of conferences to deals is just too high. He did the second year say it was getting slightly better, but it's still too high. So we need to change that. So I like to talk about the jigsaw of energy efficiency financing, and I think it's important to look at all the pieces. Because this is a short presentation, I'm only going to look at a couple of the pieces rather than all of them, particularly on standardization and capacity building on the demand side. So I want to talk about examples of both of those. Now, starting with standardization, we all know that if you have a factory and you're mass producing, in this case, Mercedes, in about 1960 or 56, something like that, you need standardization of components and processes. You cannot have mass production without standardization. But most people don't realize that banks are also factories. This happens to be a Deutsche Bank factory, but banks are basically factories. And they need standardization. And that's one thing that energy efficiency doesn't have at the moment. And Citigroup, another big factory owner that's very keen on energy efficiency, made a number of comments recently. Michael Eckhart said, energy efficiency is in a category by itself, and projects do not yet meet the requirements of the capital markets. And this is really down to lack of standardization, which increases transaction cost. So you have a lot of money that wants to invest in energy efficiency, and you have these problems of lack of standardization, small project size, and so on. So that's a real issue. And if I think about energy financing, and by that I mean energy supply financing, if you happen to own an oil or gas field, or the rights to an oil or gas field, and you want to raise money, the way that you develop that project is very standardized. It's very mainstream. There's a large volume of money out there and a large number of different investors who will invest in it. If you're developing an oil and gas field, you need a geologist report from a competent person who follows a particular standard laid down by the Society of Petroleum Engineers or other groups like that. And if you want to bring an oil and gas company to the stock exchange, then there are even more constraints on standardization. And it's the same for big renewable projects. 25 years ago, I did some very early wind farm projects in the UK, and we made it up as we went along. And the banks made it up as they went along. Or I should say, the one bank in town that would finance a wind farm. But over time, they developed standardized processes. If you want to develop a wind farm now, you need a P90 study done by one of 2 or 3 big consultancies, and you can't turn up at the bank with a P45 study done by your brother-in-law down the road. You know, it just doesn't fly. But if we look at energy efficiency, it's definitely not standardized, not mainstream, small volume, few sources of money that you can go to. And very often those are public sources or quasi-public. And as was said earlier, we need to really unleash the private market to get the volume of capital that we need. So one of the solutions to that, which I'm involved in and I want to talk about, is called the Investor Confidence Project. And the Investor Confidence Project started in the US about 4 years ago, created by the Environmental Defense Fund, which is a big environmental charity, but a very business-orientated charity. And it's supported by more than 150 allies, investors, cities, state programs, and adoption is starting to happen now. So that's the background to it. I actually started talking about this project and trying to get a European one about 2 years ago. And we now have funding, the project's off the ground. We have a combination of European funding and some other foundation funding. We have a European steering group with some big names and some smaller names, banks, development banks like the Green Investment Bank downstairs, DEC, Siemens, E.ON, and so on. And we have about 50 allies already. We've only really been going on this since the start of the year. So what we're trying to do in the Investor Confidence Project, we're creating some tools, and I'll talk about the tools, the protocols. We're going to take those tools to market, and then we'll become a catalyst for change and an increase in investment flow. Now, I talked about lack of standardization. What does that mean? What it means is if you had 3 energy consultants, energy efficiency engineers, develop projects for this building, for instance, I guarantee they'd do it in 3 different ways, and all the documentation would be different. The way they calculate the savings would be different. It's a complete hodgepodge of standards, practices, best practices, but they're all different, and that's a problem. So that gives you a number of issues. It increases the performance risk. You can't really be sure how much you're going to save. One group might be saying it's a 3-year payback, another group a 4-year payback. You just don't know. It also gives you higher transaction costs because if every project's done differently, the bank or the investor has to spend a lot of money checking them out. Also, if you're a bank and you want to lend money on this stuff, you can't build teams around ad hoc processes. You need standardization in those factories of Deutsche Bank and Citi. They all operate on standard processes. And without that, you can't build a team. And also, energy efficiency projects are very small, so we need to aggregate them. But you can't aggregate them if every project is done in a different way. So the Investor Confidence Project performance protocols basically go through the whole process of project development from baselining through projection of savings, design, operations and maintenance into M&V, and organize the existing technical processes, technical standards into a protocol. And there are protocols for different types of buildings. All the protocols have a standard kind of contents covering those stages in the projects. But it's also important to talk about what protocols don't do. Protocols are not about inventing new standards. You know, that's a very difficult thing, and there's plenty of standards out there. It's about standardizing the process and the documentation set for investors. And it doesn't restrict the engineering solutions, and we don't define a set level of energy savings. So in Europe, we have 6 protocols that are under development. We think they'll be sort of ready by the summer, covering these categories. Large projects, and large is defined by the capital spend. More than €1 million is a large project. Whole building retrofits, and then targeted projects, which are about single projects, whether it's LED lighting, heating and ventilating, whatever. So we will have those protocols developed by the middle of the year. And all of these protocols come together in something called Investor-Ready Energy Efficiency, which is really a seal of approval for a project. And that has a number of components. Project developers who are accredited, and these are American developers that have already gone through this process. Software that you can use to develop projects, which are accredited, and then a quality assurance process. So when you put all that together, you get a stamp of approval. And when we're talking to investors, including some of the very largest real estate and energy investors, that's all they really want, is some kind of seal of approval that they believe in. So the benefits: reduced transaction cost, I've talked about, reduced performance risk, it allows aggregation, it allows teams to be built. And for cities and program developers, it really just makes projects more investable. What we're really trying to do is make energy efficiency a recognizable asset class, like energy supply or infrastructure or other classes of assets. So that's the Investor Confidence Project. I just want to touch on capacity building on the demand side, and that is important because although we know this potential is here, there just isn't the demand of well-developed projects. And a project I just wanted to highlight was backed by Knauf Insulation, called the Local Authority Energy Index. And this was a way of measuring local authorities' performance on the energy agenda. And it was split into 4 categories: energy management in their own buildings, energy in the community, energy in housing, and energy infrastructure. And you can go online, you can look at the index. We only took 25 local authorities. It was a pilot study, but we tried to make those 25 authorities cover the range of authority types, the geography, and socioeconomic factors. And the purpose wasn't really to criticize any particular local authority. It was to highlight best practice and allow, as George said, people to steal other people's ideas about in different areas. So we're now co-creating the version 2 with a whole number of local authorities and partners. We're aiming to get 100 local authorities in this. But our ideal is actually to have actual performance data. This comes back to the open data point that was made earlier. And Chicago was mentioned. Chicago is a city I know very well. In Chicago and many other US cities now publish all of their energy performance data for all of their buildings online. And I think that's where we need to get to. The other area in building capacity on the demand side is what's called the layer cake of energy efficiency benefits. These are the non-energy benefits. So they can be productivity, health improvements, reduced absenteeism, and all of these have been identified. But it's only in the last few years that we've started to think about them more. And I realized about 2 or 3 years ago that the problem with energy efficiency is it's incredibly boring and very dull most of the time. And when you've been doing it for 30 years, that's quite a realization. So, the things that motivate people, whether it's, George in Bristol or other leaders in cities, it's economic development, usually pretty close to the top, job creation, all of that stuff, productivity, health. And again, that link between budgets, the point that was made earlier, that spending some money on energy efficiency in one area can actually reduce health cost. But how do you integrate those 2 budgets, or how do you take savings in one and pass it on to the other? So these are the things that really motivate people. So we need to build more capacity around that. And then my final point really is about the development gap. There is a huge potential for energy efficiency, and a big gap between the potential and bankable developed projects. And the same applies for the whole smart city agenda. It's not just energy efficiency. And how do you overcome that gap? I think leadership is really critical. Heard a lot about vision earlier. I had vision on the slide on this that I took out. Vision takes skill, and it does take risk capital, because developing a project, whether it's an energy efficiency project or a smart city project or a solar farm, takes risk capital, development capital. So we need to think about all of the pieces and put them all together. There are various programs and projects around the world where they produced a very refined piece of the jigsaw, but only one piece of the jigsaw. And you can't build a jigsaw with only one piece, however well refined and precise it is. So in terms of action, I always like to finish on action. If you're interested in the Investor Confidence Project Europe, you can sign up as an ally. Doesn't cost anything, gets you in the conversation. There is a webinar on the 30th of April, which I can give you details of. And if local authorities interested in the energy index or sponsorship, be very happy to talk more. That's my contact details, and because the Investor Confidence Project is an EU-funded project, I just have to show the disclaimer, which I will assume that you've read. So I've shown it.
Stephen.
All right, thank you.
Would you like to take a seat?
Yeah.
Richard, would you like to join us? I think that was a really good overview of some of the funding opportunities, funding issues, challenges that we're facing. We talked about silos and budgets being across silos that don't match up between the savings and the expenditure. We heard about different groups needing to come together, looking at development and the potential benefits of development in different ways in terms of private and public partnerships and land use, etc. And we also looked at a particular city, Cardiff in this case, and how they're leveraging in funds to grow economic development in their area and have benefits for people and the environment, etc. So I have one question to kickstart the discussion, and that is for councils and local authorities and cities in particular, how can they use procurement as a way to start to overcome some of these silo issues, and I guess perhaps deal with the fact that there isn't always a strong business case for some of the investments that we need to make now in order to have savings in the future. So I'll give an opportunity for each of the panelists to have a point on that to give us your views. Would you like to start, Richard?
Well, I think I would start with the slide that showed how little money is raised by local authorities in the UK and how little is spent. And then of the money they spend, only 20% is raised by them and 80% is given as a present from government. So that's quite a hard place to start. And I wonder whether I throw the question back to you and say, what about other people's procurement? I mean, you know, like academies, clinical commissioning groups, local bus companies, the whole mass of other people who are doing infrastructure but aren't local authorities that also might be able to address the question around investing to save.
Well, on that point then, are cities able to affect procurement in their area in a way? You mentioned there's other important parties that need to be involved, so perhaps the other panelists could inject any views on that as well.
Well, I think procurement is always an issue, isn't it? Particularly because of procurement rules. But at the end of the day, you can choose to procure an energy efficient product or building or a less energy efficient product, and often that sort of nicety is lost. And I think there's still a belief structure around buildings and other things that these more efficient products have to be more expensive, but that's not necessarily true. And at the end of the day, it takes somebody at the right level, leadership again, and vision to say, well, we are only going to buy A-rated appliances or only LED lighting or whatever. I think the other area that comes to mind on that is the whole area of financed retrofit solutions. And there have been some cities in the world that have got very good programs, which have gone through European procurement rules, but they decided to procure the finance of each project separately. And that was a ridiculous thing because the amounts of money are too small for the institutional investors that I was talking about. Whereas if they'd gone and said procured one source of finance, then there would have been much cheaper money available and it would have eased the process of actually getting stuff done. So, procuring at scale, and if you're procuring finance at scale, go to one and don't go to individual suppliers.
Did anyone else on the panelists want to comment on that, or shall we take questions from the floor? Okay, excellent.
No, I have something to add. Actually.
Okay.
My colleague and I were involved with a major project in Hawaii regarding seawater air conditioning as opposed to normal air conditioning, and it would save the downtown Honolulu 88% of its electrical consumption. And they raised the finance through a municipal bond because it made long-term economic sense. Now, there was a time when municipal bonds were commonplace in the UK, but our banking system is now in such a state. And we used to have industrial banks as well. I remember the British Linen Bank and these sorts of things, who took a different viewpoint and a different marketplace. But unfortunately, conventional wisdom in banking in this country is ultra short term and skewed towards residential development. And that's about it. That's like Pareto, 80-20, 80-20 scenario. And that has to change. And I don't know how we could change the banks without either legislation or forcing them or whatever. But that's what needs to change, to have a different viewpoint, unless other sources of finance start to appear.
And there is movement on the municipal bond front, of course. Not a huge amount yet, but it's only just got going here. And certainly a lot of the US stuff is funded by muni bonds, which are tax efficient and all the rest of it.
That's right, they have their own difficulties.
Yeah.
But I think if you look beyond the municipal bonds, and I know there are authorities out there who are looking to that, and particularly within the renewables space, because they are such an investable asset.
In a longer term scenario than a bank or even investor.
But if you look at that third grouping, which is the crowdfunding, certainly the solar farm that I showed there in Willersey, and a growing number around the country are being funded by either bonds or debentures. So there is new sources or new ways of collecting and allocating funding. But I think with local authorities, it's an interesting time for them, because as you're correctly saying, they are overly dependent on central government money, and that central government money is only going in one direction. So those local authorities that really want to affect change have got to be entrepreneurial. And happily, certainly with certainly in England, the ability to set up companies, to trade, to become energy suppliers, it's all possible through general powers of competence. So I think those local authorities that realise they can actually do an awful lot more than perhaps they're thinking they can do, because we've got into such a mindset that everything just comes from the centre. Once we realise that, we realise actually we can do an awful lot.
That's the way to go.
I think the point I'd like to make, that you've got to have a cohesive strategy to start off with. The issue that we have now is that there are lots of different options around renewables, and you've got to make sure you've got the right blend. You've got to make sure you've got the right connectivity into the grid, and you've also got to make sure that you're up to date with technologies. You look at solar farms. I mentioned one of the companies earlier on called IQE. They're about to bring to the market a disruptive technology which will be a solar panel the size of your fingernail, which is going to be 10 times more efficient than a current solar panel. So the other issues we have is keeping up to date with as technology moves on, and having the intelligence within your organizations to keep on top of that is particularly important. And just one point on procurement, it is frustrating in the UK that 80% of all OJU notices that are actually put out there by British companies and British organisations. Does that, how can that be? We love playing by the rules in the UK when it comes to procurement, and I think that needs to be more of a level playing field right across Europe.
David had a question, and then the woman in front of David. We'll take a couple of questions, and then the panel can respond.
Thanks. I'm David Arkell from Cambridge. Yes, having played by the rules for 23 years in a local authority, latterly as Chief Planning Officer for a short while, I think the word mindset is well meant. The word mindset needs to be voiced very often. I work in the university sector and charity sector. With some clean tech cluster in Cambridge, the very point you made just now about keeping up and investing in, not future-proof technologies, but certainly future-savvy technologies is really well made. Like solar cloth, for instance. Not plugging solar cloth company. The overall point I want to make is alternative finance, and we're developing 2 sites now with social bonds, which is very exciting. We went to the stock market just 2 weeks ago and we raised £27 million. Okay, it's only £27 million from the retail social bond sector, but it's useful. And this is about smart cities, but it's also about other places as well. And if you actually have a network of social bond land, for instance, from ARM Technology in Cambridge, you have billions to spend, or not donate, to spend and invest, and tie those together, you can work with local authorities to get the right policies in place to make a big difference. And whilst I'm just on that point about affordable homes, we're trying to put covenants in place to make affordability sort of in perpetuity, if you like. So you're actually allowing people to gain a place, shelter for their home, but actually look a bit more creatively about, not just leave it to the marketplace, but actually allow other ways of accessing property through social bond mechanisms, etc., etc.
Thank you, David. And we'll take a point from the woman in front of David.
I just wanted to say that in terms of energy efficiency, how seriously really companies take energy efficiency, especially in view of the low gas figures we have at the moment, of gas prices have collapsed for the last few years. I was just wondering what you felt when they looked at their spend, whether it was really worth taking it seriously, whether it made twice the saving in something else.
No, I think it's taken very seriously now by most companies. If you look at the retail sector, Sainsbury's have absolute energy use that's going down, even though sales, they're not going up as much as they used to be, but they're sort of flat. So their overall energy intensity is coming down. And then if you look again, retail and office world, with the LED revolution, that's just really taking off. So it's a lot of attention being given to it. And I think often in the past, people said, it's only a small proportion of cost, but the real comparison for a private company is if you can save £1,000 on your energy bill or £100,000 on your energy bill, how much extra sales do you have to generate that profit? And that equation is now being made. I think the realization of the potential for it has really taken off. And the thing about oil prices going down, even at $50 a barrel, we know the potential, the economic potential is massive. Absolutely huge. And study after study for 30 years has proven that.
Any responses to David's point on social bonds and working together with local authorities on that?
Well, what Stephen said about buildings has sort of jogged my mind a bit, because one thing I'm very interested in is co-locating public services in one place. And this may happen because a particular public service has buildings which are becoming out of date and maybe even can't meet disabled access. They may also be energy inefficient. So to save money, a particular service might think we need to change something. There's an interesting role for local authorities in coordinating those actions and saying, well, actually the police might need a new building, but so does the library, and so does the GP surgery, so let's have one building. And that might be a way in which not only energy efficiency can be worked in, but also the critical question of locating public services in places people can get to, which is sometimes it was a fascinating thing that the Campaign for Better Transport did last week, which was to do a Twitter story about someone trying to get to a hospital in a wheelchair, and it was a disgrace. It took them, 3.5 hours to go 7 miles by bus, including all sorts of things like buses not coming, and all because if you simply think in terms of, from the point of view of the health service, the best place to put every health facility is on a bypass. But that's not necessarily the best place for, it might be great for consultants, but it's not particularly good for anybody else, because you can't either get there, or also it's quite difficult to then have the same premises for the health service and anything else you might want to visit.
I'm not sure I'll answer the question directly or comment directly, but I think there's a few points being made. I mean, Nigel, you talked about vision, and I think that's fundamental. If we're to transform our places in ways that are able to accommodate these various different technologies, approaches, ideas, and to do it in a way that builds infrastructure that can accommodate a sudden change in technology that might plug into that. We've got to start with a vision of where we want to get to, and we need a clear plan for how to get there. Within that then are the mechanisms that we need to actually turn that strategy into action and to make it happen, including who the parties are, what the funding mechanisms are. Is it a bond of some sort? Is it community finance? Is it the public sector? What's the private? What are these different roles? And by doing that, I think we're going to be in a much healthier position to take account of the pace of change that for most of us it's a difficult thing to keep up with.
I think just interesting. If you look at Cardiff County Council now, they've just let go their Director of Environment. They've made 3 jobs into one, and they've amalgamated planning and sport and leisure and the environment into one job. Sometimes smart cities, and when people talk about smart cities in local government, they are treated like left-wing hippies that just want to save the planet. And it is not that at all. And the issue we have is around education and around actually getting people to understand what smart cities actually is and what it does. It isn't just about LED street lights. It isn't just about getting your traffic lights to respond. That's why Richard's talk early on I really liked, because it needs that bringing together so that to allow a blueprint for a strategy that could actually be put out around every city in the UK, so everybody goes forward at the same speed and actually shares in best practice and actually gets there a little bit quicker. Because I could tell you, even from Cardiff's perspective, it's seen as just, smart cities, they really don't get it. And until people get it, all these other elements are not going to fall into place.
Which is about capacity building at leadership level.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We'll take one final comment from Guy, or question from Guy.
Guy Hamilton from BRE. First of all, I really enjoyed the competitive bit earlier between some of our cities, especially as a man who in a former life built that wonderful bridge that gets you rapidly to Cardiff.
God, that's expensive.
It gets you there. I know what will happen when they improve the train station in Bristol. They'll all stop before they get to you, presumably. My question, picking up on the smart bit, though, is part of what we've heard about in this conference has been all the new digital infrastructure that has come. And I'd be interested in the view of the panel, the extent to which this is seen as a positive thing that is disruptively cutting through those silos and creating completely new service delivery business models, but also the extent to which it brings a real challenge to the future.
Well, I went to an open data conference. I thought I ought to understand more about open data, and it was all in the dark. And so I said, well, I can't take any notes. He said, well, no one else is. You're the only person in this room with a pen. So that was, they all had, like tablets. But what struck me as interesting is everyone was, was wonderful things about, the snow plows and, all these different apps that can do different things. And I said, well, what interests me is giving data to people so they can challenge things like, why are there not enough buses? It's fine to know that there isn't one for 20 minutes. So I want to know is, why isn't there one for 20 minutes? And what's the city going to do about changing that? And that went down quite oddly. Most people sort of we never thought about using it, for democracy. That was 2 years ago, so it's a fast-moving world. But what interests me is, how can people gather the data together? And there are people now doing this and saying, this is wrong and something should change. And and I've got evidence that I've accumulated amateurishly, but accurately, and I've done it in my spare time. I'm going to take my evidence to my MP, to my council, to the minister, and say that the data tells you that you need to start changing how this happens. And I think it's quite exciting that it's disruptive politically, because a lot of people can do it now, whereas before you had to be kind of paid to gather data and write reports.
Well, I think clearly the whole digital agenda is really important. On the other hand, it doesn't matter how many apps you have if the local transformer around the corner, which is 60 years old, falls over tomorrow and Westminster goes dark. But, well, it might be... Yeah, Holborn. Yeah, Holborn was a good point. So so physical stuff is always going to be really important. At the end of the day, it's about physical stuff. And we shouldn't forget that. Sometimes the digital generation with their iPads in meetings, he says, flicking his pen, get carried away sometimes. And there is a bit of hype around the whole smart city stuff. I mean, I'm on record as saying 80% of it is hype and 20% of it is real. But then that does feed into the organizational issue and business model. This is actually about business model innovation and service delivery innovation. And every organization is set up in the way that history has determined it to be, you know, an engineering department, a planning department, and trying to put them together in some kind of new service delivery. And by the way, we're going to add some community funding to it. So we need that kind of expertise. How do you do that? It's not an easy task. But so business model innovation is critical.
Have time for any more questions, so I'll just take any final comments there from Nigel or Rob and then close the session.
Well, just in conclusion, I think it's important that all of us actually take the time to imagine what cities will look like in 50 years' time. We're already having to, to work with technology, and technology, the digital world is changing so fast. It sounds, like sitting around smoking wacky-packy in a tent, but we do need to actually think about, the direction of travel and what is a city going to look like in 50 years' time, and then put a strategic plan together to actually say, that's how we'll deal with it.
And I think related, really, we need to understand where we want to get to and why we're innovating to do that. So if there are good reasons to do it, do we need business models? We know we're going to need new business models, new funding sources, new partnerships, etc. But it's about starting from the position of, okay, what do we want to achieve out of this, and making sure that we design it effectively rather than embracing new technology just for the sake of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Can we thank our panelists? So I think that was a fantastic coming round back to where we started yesterday with connectivity and smart cities. Then we moved through into the growth of cities and how we were going to manage that to bring about the social, environmental and economic outcomes and positive outcomes that we're looking for. This morning we were focused on infrastructure and resilience, and then we've moved through into finance where we're thinking of how can we fund all of these things. So it's been an excellent 2 days. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks also for the conversation on Twitter, which has been really interesting to follow, and that will carry on, I'm sure. So yes, again, thank you very much. Can we thank all of our speakers and contributors finally to end the day? Thank you.